Hello team, it's Fullshock, and this is a quick introduction into 8v8s in Bar and how to get started playing the game. 8v8 lobbies in Bar are the ones that have a total of 16 players, as you see on the right. When you first start looking for lobbies, you want to look for lobbies that have either noobs or all welcome in the title, because you'll be matched with similarly skilled players. Balance is done through open skill, which is the number next to everyone's name. The higher, the more skilled they are. All players start at 16 open skill. And if you want more information about how it works, how it's calculated, you can find a ton of information on the website. Let's talk about how starting positions are dictated by maps, both their terrain and the resources that are available. So first, we're going to look at DSDR, which is a common 8v8 map, and I'm going to move my commander to all of the start locations that players spawn at. And you'll notice that for each of these, there's either 2 or 3 mexes. So on more or less every map, these will be relatively well defined. If you do want to find the starting positions for any map, you can just go to the website, find the map, whichever map it is, you can type it in or click it and click on any replay, and it'll show the starting positions of every player. So Bar has an absolute ton of maps and it's awesome. But when you first start playing, it'll feel a little intimidating. The important thing to know when you first start playing and you're looking at the map pool is just to know whether a map is what we call a lane map, where all 8 players will push forward in their lane, or a role map, where you will have frontline players pushing forward in a lane, and you'll have backline players with specific roles. We are going to begin by talking about lane maps, and we'll start with Bismuth Valley, which is a really common 8v8 lane map. Once we see everyone loads in, we can look at their lanes. It's a little hard from this angle, but if we look at it from the top, we can even draw lines. A lane is just from the east to the west player, or from the north to the south player. That is the area of the map that they're responsible for. So in this example, the top lane, pink, will be pushing against blue, and they want to get all the way across, and that is their lane opponent. So once you're in your lane and you know that you need to push forward in your lane, the most important thing is to occupy your lane. When you're occupying your lane, it means that you're building mexes. You're sending units towards the middle of the map. It's super important on lane maps that you push forward both with units and with your commander. And you want to push towards the middle of the map, as you can see Avocado and myself doing here. Now, eventually, you're going to push your lane and you're going to find your lane opponent, the other player who is in your lane. When that happens, you'll both stall your pushes and you'll sort of establish an equilibrium somewhere towards the middle of the map. That's going to happen all the way across the entire map. And if we scroll through it and just kind of look, we can see that equilibrium in this game. We call where everyone meets in the middle the front line, which is where frontliners get their name. Once the front line is established, you kind of have free reign for what you would like to do. There's a lot of different strategies and a lot of different approaches to actually winning your lane or winning the game. So here are just a few examples. First is a tier 1 unit rush, where you just keep massing T1 units. Here we see green built a lot of blitzes, found an opening in the enemy's front line, and then pushed his blitz through their front line, and is now going to be able to go hit bases and deal some eco damage. Another common thing to do is tech. Here we can see blue has mines and has blitzes and LLTs. So he is going to eat his tier 1 lab and then build a tier 2 lab so that he can kickstart his economy and he can give tier 2 constructors to his teammates. You can also do an air transition. Blue in this game is holding the front line, and he ate his lab behind him and instead built a bunch of bombers. And here you can see they're super effective. They're going to run over the front line that doesn't have enough AA. And after bombing the front, they can make their way to the back of the opponent and destroy factories, economy, and everything else. It's also important to note that not every lane is straight across or on ground. This is 8 horses, another common 8v8 lane map. And if you look at the third lane, which is between green and pink, it's a river. And the river actually cuts across 2 other lanes. So this is their lane, but they're going to actually contest it with other people. While you're pushing forward to occupy your lane, it's important that you start with the correct factory and you make the correct kind of units. For more difficult terrain, you want to start with a bot lab and make bots. If it's flatter terrain, you can start with a vehicle lab and make vehicles. Regardless if you pick bots or vehicles, once you get towards the equilibrium point, you need to start making defenses like light laser turrets to defend your lane. If you have a water lane, like the lane that we just saw on 8 horses, you would make ships. But generally speaking, on a lane map, you never want to start with aircraft or hovercraft. You can build them once the lane reaches equilibrium, but before that, you need to make bots or vehicles with a lot of defenses. So AV8 lane maps are generally more open, and a lot of times they'll be more square. Flats and forests is another example of this. There's almost no defensible terrain, which means that you need to make units and push with those units. But that's pretty commonplace amongst all 8v8 frontline maps. Some common lane maps in Bar that you will see are Bismuth Valley with the flat center, Red River Estuary with the lane of water on the bottom, Flats and Forests, which is essentially completely flat with a couple of geos, 8 Horses, which has the special third water lane, Ascendancy, which is a high mountain lane at the top and an ice lane at the bottom, River Run, Dark Side, Light Side with dual craters in the middle, and Rust Crown Canyon with a river running through it. Let's get a quick recap of lane maps. So remember, 8v8 lane maps, all 8 players start opposite from each other and they push their lane. When you push your lane, you need to make units and you need to move those units and your commander forward towards the middle of the map to establish the front line. There's no air player, there's no eco player, there's no teching on a frontline map. You need to push your lane, as you can see everyone doing here. So lane maps are much more straightforward because everyone only has one job or one role. You need to push your lane and then figure out a way to win. Role maps are a little bit more complicated because there are multiple roles, multiple jobs that everyone needs to do to make sure that you can win the game. I'm going to start off talking about role maps with All That Glitters, which is a common 8v8 role map. And if you notice on All That Glitters, we have 4 players in the front who are the front line that are pushing the lane. But we also have 4 players behind them who are not directly pushing a lane in front of them. We call these 4 players the back line. This means that you can have up to 4 roles on a role map. You can have the frontliner, you can have a teching player, you can have an air player, and you can have a flex player or flex players. The frontline is more or less the same. All you're going to do as a frontliner on a role map is push up in your lane, take all the mexes, and then establish a front, like you see everyone doing here. The tech position makes no military units. Instead, they build a small economy, detonate their commander for bonus metal, and get a tier 2 lab as fast as possible. They use that tier 2 lab to share tier 2 constructors with the rest of their team, so their team can benefit from having a tier 2 economy without needing to invest in tier 2 factories right away. From there, they'll do some light scaling with a fusion. They're also responsible for having anti-nuke and anti-stealth buildings and some backup anti-air buildings. Once those are in place, the eco players will normally try to do timing pushes. For example, here is a timing push with hounds, where the tier 2 hounds hit a front line that has tier 1 units. They're able to do a lot of damage because they hit the field faster, and all of the metal that is left behind is reclaimable and can be used to bolster their economy once it's reclaimed. Another timing push example are Marauders, seen here. Marauders are fast raiding units, and against an unprepared foe with a timing push, they're able to deal a lot of economic damage and win the game for the player. At the end of the day, eco is a mixture of economy and units, but it's important to try to be as active as possible on the map. Air on a role map is really important and has a lot of duties that it needs to cover. One of the most important things air can do, especially early on, is scout. You need to know what your opponents are doing so that you can react to them, because it is a real-time strategy game. Another thing that air players can do is provide a transport to their allies so that their allies can move either their commanders or units to places where they need to be faster and more efficiently. Air players also need to create a fighter wall as the game goes on to oppose the enemy air players, bombers, or attacks. And finally, air players are responsible for attacking the enemy with air, shocker, normally through bombing runs. The last role of air units is to provide ground support. You will normally see this in the form of Cortex drones at tier 1, which can EMP raiding units and allow other players to respond. As the game progresses, this will transition into Armada Stiletto EMP bombers. Here we can see a group of Stiletto EMP bombers rendering a tier 3 3000 metal Razorback completely useless. The final position is the flex position, and it's difficult to describe because, as the name implies, it's flexible to the state of the game. We're looking at the blue player here who opens bots, transitions into air for some bombing and scouting, then goes nuke, then ecos, and then makes a calamity. So when you play flex, it's really important to respond to the state of the game. Flex players will commonly help their frontline just by making units at the start, and then figure out better ways to win the game. When we talked about All That Glitters, we talked about how it had 4 front and 4 back. And that's a pretty common situation for a lot of role maps, where we say they are 4x4, meaning 4 front and 4 backline. When we break that down, we say, oh, there's 4 frontliners, 2 flex, 1 tech, and 1 air. So let's talk about some of the other common 4v4 role maps. Nuclear Winter is the same as Glitters. It's also a 4x4 with 4 front, 2 flex, 1 tech, and 1 air. Pawn Retreat is the same. It's a 4x4, 4 front, 2 flex, 1 tech, and 1 air. And one of the most common maps you'll play is Supreme Straight, which is also 4 front, 2 flex, 1 tech, and 1 air. But maps can be different. Rosetta, for example, is a 5x3, and it has 1 flex, 1 tech, and 1 air. Going even further, we have Coombe Valley, which is 6-2, meaning there's 6 in the front, and you only have 1 tech and 1 air position. Swirly Rock is the same. It also only has 1 tech and 1 air position with 6 in front. So it's important when you're playing to look at the map and see how many frontline roles there are and how many backline roles there are, and to make sure that you are fitting what the suggested roles of the map are so that your teammates know what to expect. Now that we've talked about some of the maps, let's just briefly summarize role maps. So role maps will have up to 4 positions. The frontline, who's going to push to the front, create a defensive area, and then try to win the lane. Then there will be an eco position or a tech position, which is going to rush tier 2, give out tier 2 constructors, try to get anti-nuke, and then do some timing pushes. There will be an air position, which is going to attempt to scout, provide transports, provide a fighter wall, bomb, and provide ground support where possible. There's also flex positions on certain maps that are more free and able to accommodate the game state, so they are much more reactionary. When you first begin, We generally recommend that you try playing front lane because it's the simplest role to play. I would recommend, if possible, you can find a lobby that has lane maps running because those are the best places to learn. In general, you want to avoid air and eco positions until you're a little bit more comfortable with the game, but feel free to explore when you're able to. When you're playing 8v8s in bar, please keep in mind that there is a code of conduct that you can find on the website. I'll scroll through it here briefly, but it essentially says, please be nice, please be respectful, and don't do anything bad. This includes things like degunning allies or intentionally griefing. All of that is something that can potentially get you moderated. Additionally, you cannot have an alt. That will also get you moderated. If you're in a game and players are disruptive and harassing you, or you just don't want to listen to them, you can control click their name and it'll draw a line through them and you will ignore them. If you want to try again later, you can always just control click their name again and it will remove the ignore. But use this whenever you feel like you don't want to communicate with someone. Alternatively, if someone does something incredibly egregious, you can always report them by right-clicking on their name and then making sure that you type in an accurate report to the moderators who review every case. A great way to begin learning bar if you're nervous about stepping in is to find a lobby and remove yourself as a player by pressing exit Q. And this will move you as a spectator and it'll show your name as a spectator in the bottom. Then you can click join or rejoin and you'll launch into the game. You'll have a bird's eye view. You can look at everything. You can also filter and look at the team LOS, or you can look at a specific player's camera and see what they see, why they're doing it, and give you a better judge of what to do in a certain position. It's important to note that you can communicate with both the players and the other spectators in a lobby, but if you're typing in white, your message will go to everyone, and it's kind of rude for most spectators to chat. However, if you are typing in yellow by hitting Alt-Enter, then you're only speaking to other spectators, and you can ask questions, get more information, or get more clarity for the 8v8 that you're watching. The last thing I want to talk about is that this is the established way of playing, but it doesn't mean that's what you're limited to. I would say that you should first start and kind of understand how the game is basically played and then explore from there. Bar is an incredibly vast and creative game, and some of the coolest ways to play it are ways that are quote unquote outside of the meta. So play a few games and first start to understand how the game is played, and then from there you can experiment. These are guidelines, these aren't hard set rules. For example, here is a game where on a lane map where one of our allies opened air and gave us transports, and the transports allowed us to fly our commanders farther up in the lane before the enemy commander could push up. And that meant that we were able to build a forward base and have more map control, have more resources, and eventually win the game. Here's another example where 8 players on Supreme Straight, which is traditionally a role map with 4 frontliners and 4 backliners, decided to just play with 8 frontliners. So every single player made vehicles, made tanks, and then at the 7-minute mark, while the other team was teching and ecoing and contesting C, they just pushed with 100 tanks, overwhelmed, and then eventually won the game. So is that the standard style of play? No, but they won the game. So once you do understand how the game is played normally, feel free to experiment. That's what makes bar great. That's why it's fun, and that's why so many of us enjoy playing it. If you do want to play, or if you want more information, feel free to hop in the Discord. You can grab any role that you're interested in, whether you want to do development or just play, just get more information, whether you're part of a certain language community, etc. There's also a channel specifically for new players, which is Academy Chat. So feel free to hop in there and ask questions. People can do replay reviews. There's also mentors. And that's it. Hope you guys have fun learning bar, and good luck.